What hides behind the most contagious laugh? Is the ability to make the entire world roar with laughter born from the purest joy? Or can it be forged in the fire of an inner darkness that few can see? There is a thin, dangerous line between the comedic genius and the tormented soul, and it is on this border that the most complex truths about the human psyche are revealed. Here at The Truth, Dark Psychology, we investigate the minds that shaped our culture, exposing the hidden forces that drove them. If you have the courage to look beyond the mask, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and prepare yourself. Today, we will unravel the story of a man who offered the world infinite joy while silently waging a war within himself. The figure of the sad clown is one of the most powerful and disturbing archetypes in our culture, and few have embodied it with as much intensity as the comedy genius we analyze today. His frantic, almost superhuman energy was not just a gift for entertainment. It was, in its essence, an elaborate psychological mask. This constant performance of euphoria served as a brilliant defense mechanism, a barrier of noise and movement designed to keep his own inner demons at bay. By turning himself into a hurricane of joy, he created a public persona so dazzling that no one would dare or be able to look at the darkness it concealed. Perhaps not even himself. Psychologically, this extreme manifestation of extroversion can be a classic symptom of deep-seated anxiety and a desperate need for external validation. Every laugh he drew from the audience was not just a comedic success, but a momentary dose of relief, a confirmation that he was loved and accepted. However, this validation is ephemeral and creates a vicious cycle. The need to maintain the performance at an ever higher level to get the same emotional response becomes exhausting, turning the stage, and eventually life itself, into a high-speed treadmill from which it is impossible to step off without facing the deafening silence of one's own mind. This omnipresent public persona is a subtle yet powerful tool of control. By defining himself exclusively through the joy he provided to others, he manipulated public perception so effectively that any glimpse of his real pain would be met with shock and disbelief. This created a prison of his own making, a place where he was loved for being someone who did not represent his whole self. The fear of disappointing the public, of shattering the illusion, forced him to wear the mask even when it became unbearably heavy, isolating him in his own suffering. The manic energy that characterized him can also be seen as an avoidance strategy. As long as he was in the midst of a brilliant improvisation, creating voices and characters at a dizzying pace, there was no room for introspective thought, for pain, or for traumatic memories. It was a forward escape, a constant race away from himself. Comedy for him was not just a profession. It was a survival technique, the only way he knew to keep the darkness at bay, even if it meant completely exhausting himself in the process. Understanding this dynamic is to understand the dark psychology behind many great performers. The art they offer us, the joy we feel, is often a byproduct of immense personal pain. We, as the audience, become consumers not only of their talent, but indirectly of their struggle. The mask of euphoria is a gift to the world, but an immense burden for the one who wears it, a constant reminder that appearances are not just deceiving. They are, at times, an armor carefully constructed for a silent war. Improvisation, the hallmark of his brilliance, was much more than a simple comedic skill. It was the primary operating mechanism of his psyche. For a mind that perhaps lived under the constant siege of negative thoughts and anxiety, the ability to generate a relentless stream of creativity was a form of combat. Improvisation became an offensive weapon against silence, filling every empty space with jokes, voices, and characters before the darkness could creep in. It was a way to perpetually stay one step ahead of his own pain, keeping the mind so occupied with creation that there was no time left for rumination. This need to improvise also reveals a deep desire for control, one of the central facets of Dark psychology. In a normal conversation, there's a flow of give and take, moments of vulnerability, and pauses for reflection. In a torrent of improvisation, he completely controlled the dynamic of the interaction. He became the room's center of gravity, dictating the pace, energy, and focus, overwhelming others with his brilliance and giving them no chance to penetrate his true personal sphere. It was a way to connect with people on his own terms, without ever having to truly reveal himself. Analyzing deeper, this spontaneous genius can be interpreted as a sophisticated form of dissociation. By jumping from one character to another, from one voice to the next, he could distance himself from his own self. Each character was a small escape, temporary vacation from being himself. This fragmentation, while artistically productive, is psychologically risky. In the long run, the line between the persona and the real person can become dangerously blurred, leading to an identity crisis where the true self feels lost amidst a crowd of masks he himself created. The risk of this strategy is a dependency on chaos. A mind accustomed to operating in a state of constant improvisation may have immense difficulty finding peace in stillness. Calm becomes threatening, as it is in the silence that suppressed thoughts return with full force. This partly explains the search for external stimuli, the difficulty in being alone, and the constant need to be on. The engine of genius fueled by escape had no off switch, condemning him to an existence of perpetual motion so as not to be caught by himself. What we can learn from this is the dual nature of creativity. The same process that generates art and laughter can be a response to trauma or deep pain. The genius of improvisation, in this case, was both a gift to us and a survival strategy for him. He taught us that the human mind can transform suffering into something beautiful and hilarious, but he also warned us that behind the most brilliant performance, there may be an individual desperately trying to control a chaotic inner universe. The struggle against addiction to alcohol and cocaine is a dark but essential part of his psychological biography. It is a mistake, however, to view this battle solely through the lens of moral failure. Within the framework of dark psychology, addiction is rarely the primary disease. It is, almost always, a symptom, a desperate attempt to self-medicate, and almost always a self-dom. Unbearable underlying pain. For a mind like his, which operated at a very high frequency of anxiety and sensitivity, substances offered a chemical silence that sobriety could not provide. Cocaine, in particular, fits perfectly with the public persona he built. It amplified the manic energy, the speed of thought, and the feeling of euphoria, allowing him to maintain the mask for longer and with more intensity. However, what goes up must come down, and the crash after using the substance plunged him into an even deeper depression, intensifying the cycle of pain from which he was trying to escape. Addiction became a cruel paradox. The solution to his suffering was, in fact, its main catalyst, digging an ever deeper pit. On the other hand, alcohol often serves as a nervous system depressant, a way to slow down a mind that won't stop. If improvisation was the forward escape, alcohol was the emergency brake. It was an attempt to numb his extreme sensitivity, to shut down the brain that absorbed and processed everything around him with overwhelming intensity. The problem is that this self-medication also dulls the ability to feel genuine joy, to connect truly, and to access the emotional tools needed to deal with the root cause of the pain. The dynamic of addiction in a public figure carries an additional weight of shame and secrecy. The pressure to maintain the image of a beloved and funny icon made admitting such a human weakness a source of immense internal conflict. This secrecy aggravates the isolation, which is the fertile ground for addiction. To thrive, the same fame that gave him the validation he so desperately sought also became a gilded cage that prevented him from seeking help openly and honestly, for fear of tarnishing his legacy and disappointing millions of fans. Analyzing his addiction. as a symptom forces us to look at the pain that originated it. It was not a hedonistic pursuit of pleasure, but a desperate search for relief. He was at war not with the substances, but with himself. The alcohol and drugs were just the weapons he chose in a battle he felt he was losing. This teaches us a powerful lesson about compassion and judgment, showing that often, the most self-destructive behaviors are born from the deepest places of human suffering. Behind every joke, every character, and every explosive performance, there was an almost insatiable hunger for validation. This need to please was not just a desire to be liked, as most people feel, but a fundamental driving force of his existence. For him, the audience's laughter was not a bonus, it was oxygen. Its absence, or the mere possibility of rejection, was felt as an existential threat. This dynamic placed him in a position of extreme vulnerability, where his sense of self-worth was entirely outsourced, dependent on the reaction of thousands of strangers. This hunger for validation often has roots in childhood experiences, such as feelings of loneliness or the need to perform to earn love and attention. In his case, being an only child and spending a lot of time alone may have created an inner universe that later needed to be filled by the sound of applause. He learned early on that his ability to be funny and captivating was his most valuable social currency. This turned him into a master of reading rooms and people, adjusting his performance in real time to maximize approval, a skill of social manipulation born from necessity. The dark side of this need to please is the erosion of the authentic self. When the top priority is to be what others want you to be, your own identity begins to dissolve. He became an emotional chameleon, able to mold himself to fit any situation and please any audience. While this is a demonstration of immense social intelligence and empathy, it also means that he could rarely just be. There was always a performance underway, a social risk-reward analysis running in the background, which is psychologically exhausting. The fear of rejection that accompanies this hunger for validation is paralyzing. For someone whose identity is so intertwined with external approval, a joke that falls flat or a negative review is not just professional feedback, it's a devastating personal attack. This can lead to an unhealthy perfectionism, where each performance has to be bigger and better than the last, creating unsustainable pressure. The joy of a million laughs can be erased by the pain of a single impassive face in the audience not understanding. This dynamic is crucial to deciphering the complexity of his mind. He was not just an artist seeking applause. He was a soul seeking confirmation of his own validity. He gave us laughter but paid a high price for it, sacrificing his inner peace in exchange for our momentary adoration. This Faustian bargain is at the heart of many celebrity tragedies, the search for love on a massive scale, only to discover that the love of millions cannot fill the void, that only self-love can heal. We are diving deep into the complex psyche of a genius. If this analysis is opening your eyes to the hidden layers behind the laughter, then don't forget to like this video and subscribe to The Truth, Dark Psychology. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these investigations. And comment below, what other public figure, seemingly happy, do you suspect was fighting an internal battle? Your suggestions fuel our next scripts. Now, let's get back to the darkness. One of the most celebrated qualities of his personality was his immense empathy and kindness, a trait that shone brightly in both his dramatic roles and his real-life interactions. However, from the perspective of dark psychology, even the most beautiful of virtues can have a dangerous side. His empathy was not just a skill. It was a condition. He didn't just understand others' feelings. He absorbed them. His mind was like an emotional sponge without an effective filter, soaking up joy, but also, and more critically, the pain, anxiety, and suffering of everyone around him. This boundless empathy, which made him such a convincing dramatic actor in films like Good Will Hunting and Dead Poets Society, was a double-edged sword. It allowed him to channel complex human emotions with breathtaking authenticity, but it also left him vulnerable and defenseless in the real world. For a person already struggling with his own inner darkness, carrying the emotional weight of others is a recipe for psychological collapse. Every sad story he heard, every suffering fan he met, added another burden to his already heavy load. The concept of emotional contagion is fundamental here. Highly empathetic people run the risk of not being able to distinguish between their own feelings and the feelings they have absorbed from others. This can lead to profound internal confusion and a state of chronic emotional overload. The manic energy of his comedy can then be seen not only as an escape from his own pain, but also as a desperate attempt to generate a positive emotion strong enough to overpower the negativity he constantly absorbed from his environment. This characteristic also made him susceptible to manipulation. People with an intrinsic need to help and heal others can be easily exploited by those who perceive this vulnerability. The inability to say no, the desire to alleviate everyone's suffering, can lead to unbalanced relationships and a complete depletion of his own emotional and financial resources. His generosity was legendary, but it's likely that this same generosity left him exposed and was, at times, taken advantage of. In the end, his devastating empathy teaches us about the dangers of feeling too much in a world full of pain. A beacon of light for others can mean burning your own fuel at an unsustainable rate. The very quality that made him one of the most beloved human beings on the planet was also one of the sources of his silent torment. He felt everything too deeply: the joy, the sadness, the beauty, and inevitably, the tragedy of the human condition, a sensitivity that was both his greatest gift and his greatest curse. The posthumous revelation of his diagnosis of Lewy body dementia is the final and most tragic piece of this psychological puzzle. This is not just a medical footnote in his story. It is the factor that redefines his entire final struggle. LBD is a terrifying neurological disease that attacks the very essence of the mind, causing cognitive fluctuations, visual hallucinations, paranoia, anxiety, and severe depression. The darkness he was fighting was not just a psychological metaphor. In his final years, it became a physical and inescapable invasion of his brain. Imagine the horror for a man whose entire identity was built on the masterful control of his mind, its speed, its brilliance, its creativity, as he felt that very mind fragmenting and turning against itself. The anxiety and paranoia, which he may have fought his whole life, were amplified to an unbearable level by the disease. Reports indicate that he was aware he was losing control, describing the feeling as if he were separating from himself. This is the ultimate form of psychological imprisonment, being lucid enough to witness your own mind disintegrate. Lewy body dementia explains many of the behaviors and the suffering that were previously attributed only to depression or addiction. The profound insecurity, the panic attacks on set, the fear and confusion were not character flaws, but direct symptoms of a neurological war. He was fighting an invisible enemy that was rewriting his brain chemistry, making joy increasingly inaccessible and darkness a constant, concrete presence. The battle he fought was far crueler than any of us could have imagined. This disease represents the final loss of control, the central theme that runs through his entire life. From using improvisation to control social interactions to self-medicating, to control his state of mind, his life was a constant search for some kind of dominion over his inner universe. LBD robbed him of that absolutely and mercilessly. The mind that had been his greatest tool and his greatest refuge became his torture cell, a place from which there was no escape, not even through comedy. By recontextualizing his story through the lens of this disease, we are forced to a grim and profound conclusion. He did not take his own life because he was simply sad. He did so, perhaps, as a final act of autonomy in the face of a disease that would rob him of everything: his mind, his identity, and his dignity. It was the final escape from a prison that was no longer metaphorical but neurologically real. A desperate act to silence the terror of a mind that no longer belonged to him. The legacy of a man who made the world laugh while suffering in silence is complex and carries a powerful warning for us all. We, as the audience, consumed his light, his laughter, his contagious energy, but remained largely oblivious to the price he paid for this performance. His story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about celebrity culture and our own tendency to see icons as one-dimensional products rather than multifaceted, fragile human beings. We demand the joy but ignore the pain that may lie behind it. Asterisk. The deepest lesson from his life is about the nature of mental health. He showed us that depression and anxiety do not have a face. They can live behind the widest smile, in the soul of the funniest person in the room. His tragedy was a catalyst for global conversations about mental health, breaking the stigma that seeking help is a sign of weakness. He taught us that the hardest battle is often the one that no one can see, and that compassion and empathy should be extended to everyone, especially those who seem not to need it. His story is also a dark exploration of the price of genius. The same brain wiring that gave him his limitless creativity, his sensitivity, and his radical empathy was also the source of his greatest vulnerability. This raises a disturbing question. Is it possible to have this level of brilliance without a corresponding dose of pain? His life suggests that, for some, genius and torment are two sides of the same coin, inseparably linked, and that the flame that burns brightest is often the one that consumes itself the fastest. We also learn about the importance of looking beyond the mask. In our own lives, we are surrounded by people who may be fighting invisible battles. His story is a call to action to be more attentive, to ask "How are you?" and really listen to the answer, to create safe spaces where vulnerability is not seen as a burden. He made us laugh, but his final legacy may be to teach us how to cry with those who suffer, to acknowledge the darkness so that we can, collectively, seek the light. In the end, the tragedy of his death should not overshadow the immense joy he brought to the world. Instead, it should deepen our appreciation for it. Every laugh he gave us was a victory in his personal war, an act of generosity born amidst suffering. He transformed his pain into our relief, and that is the final act of an empathetic genius. His legacy is not just of comedy, but of a complex and profound humanity, an eternal reminder that we must take care of each other, for we never know the true depth of the darkness someone may be facing. The human mind is a labyrinth of light and shadow, and the story we explored today is one of its most moving and instructive. If you believe that understanding dark psychology is essential to understanding the world, then become part of our community. Subscribe now to The Truth, Dark Psychology. Activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future investigations. And leave your comment below. What was the most impactful lesson you took from this analysis? Your perspective enriches our quest for the truth. Until the next video.